Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video I want to talk about the recent demo that was released for Forspoken. Yes, I did play it, I just haven't had time to make the video explaining my thoughts about it. But here I am, I'm just going to talk about whatever I can think of. I'm sure there's going to be elements of it that I don't comment on or I forget about, I'm going to be going with what really stood out to me, both the good and the bad. So for those who don't know, Forspoken is a third-person action RPG being developed by Luminous Studios and published by Square Enix. Yes, that's the studio that made Final Fantasy 15, and yes, that will come up again later. It is going to be releasing on January 24th on the PlayStation 5 and PC, but the demo I could only find on PS5, unless I'm just dumb and couldn't find it on Steam, so that's the version I'm going to be talking about today. Hey, so interjecting this, I actually finished recording the whole video and then wanted to interject this before I talked about the demo too much. The footage I'm using is going to be in colorblind mode for a fair portion of this. I'll talk about and joke about it a lot later into the video, but I figured I might as well just make mention of it here and just include the non-colorblind footage before I use it, because you're going to be wondering what the heck happened and what's wrong with my footage if I don't add this disclaimer. The number of times I had that happen during my live stream of this, like, hey, is this color broken? Or is my monitor broken? It's like, no, my eyes suck. That's what happened. So I turned on colorblind mode and ran through most of this with colorblind mode to see if it would help. But I'll talk about that later. Also, the game has one major issue before even talking about the demo, in that live streaming it and capturing footage is a little difficult. It's very particle intense, and as such, it's going to look worse to you than it does to me. I thought that it looked really good when I was playing it locally, but I know that the bit rates and the live stream and recording, I know it's going to look like an utter mess. So you've been warned, it just probably won't present as well as it actually looks on your actual screen. Anyway, let me get back to past haps taking care of the rest of the video. So first off, this was largely a technical demo. At the very start of the demo, it kicks off by not really spoiling any of the story. It goes over things that we've seen from the various trailers, but it skips us to like a point that's a little bit further in, about level 17, and after you have a couple of different magic sets, which we'll talk about later. I would have actually liked to have seen some cutscenes. While the trailers give me, a broad overview, and I don't think I would have really learned anything new, nor would I be looking to. Seeing how cutscenes are put together and delivered is something that you really need to experience firsthand. It doesn't matter how many times you see it in the trailer, it matters how it feels when you do it organically in the game. So as much as I love something like a technical demo, I do think they should have found a way to incorporate some of the storytelling in just a cutscene or two to give me a feel for it. So since it's a technical demo, that's all I really have to talk about. You're thrown into an open zone with 2 sets of magic, some parkour skills, and a set of objectives. First, the zone itself. They really nailed getting around being fun, especially by the end of the demo, when I'd learned a few more skills and mastered the movement. If you're going to make big open spaces, honestly, it's been a struggle for a lot of open world games. We take these different objectives or maybe just explore every corner or inch to find any secrets, but this game focuses on making sure that Frey, the main character, has all of these tools to get around, and that it's something that you can just do because it's fun. And it's also not as big as it may seem when first glancing at it. Frey gets around really quick, there are fast travel points, so there's all these things that make it so it's not cumbersome to get around, and I'm very, very grateful for that. We also know there are other tools that we don't have access to yet from the trailers, but I guess I can't comment on that because I didn't play it. Now, second, the objectives. These are the tried and true open world objectives. Clear out a castle or town of enemies, perform set time challenges, find loot, pet a unicorn cat, the usual. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't unique. If these kind of worlds scratch your completionist itch like mine, you'll probably feel quite driven while playing, especially given you're going to be unlocking a lot of new items, recipes, as well as power-ups for Frey through directly gaining stats from completing some of these things. Third, the enemies. I do like the transformed wildlife and human life that populate the zone. It's rare that I get to fight what boils down to a demon moose or a magical alligator. There's also a good mix of enemies that serve different purposes, and that's really important when you have this action-style RPG. You have the smaller, weaker enemies that may not individually be very threatening, but if there's a bunch of them, then you get to style around and have fun. If they're mixed with the more difficult enemies, then they actually become somewhat of a problem. And that happened a few times, especially as I toyed around with the various difficulties of the game. There are, of course, the larger and sturdier enemies that require more forethought and strategy. I'll touch more on this when I talk about the combat combat directly, but at the very least, it was satisfactory. Again, nothing really stand out-ish, it's just kind of cool stylistically to see some of these creatures. And finally, dialogue. Now, we didn't get any cutscenes, but we did get some dialogue between Frey and her companion, Cuff. Now, Luminous Studio granted the cast of Final Fantasy XV with a lot of banter, and it seems Frey and Cuff are no different. They constantly bicker, tease, and compliment each other frequently, which I personally find endearing. That being said, lines did start to repeat fairly quickly just for generally getting into combat, leaving combat, taking a hit. You just recognize these things really quick, even over about a 3-hour time span, which is what I spent on the demo. The developers clearly knew this wasn't going to be everyone's cup of tea. That was a piece of feedback they got from 15, and so there is an option to customize how frequently they poke fun at each other, or if you just want to hear it very seldomly, you can turn it almost all the way down. Now that covers the area, the zone, the things that populate it, but before getting too much further into the combat, I want to talk about the progression systems in place. They're mostly standard on a functional level, but very customized to Frey's individual character in the context of the game. So Freya has 4 pieces of equipment. The first one is her cloak, and that mostly affects her health and defense more, while her necklace affects her damage. They both have bonus enchantments which can be customized to your liking at an enchantment station, with more options opening up as you discover recipes. You can even level these equipment pieces up after using them enough, improving their base stats. Her other 2 equipment slots are her nails, which you can set on each hand. These offer other unique effects and cost materials to repaint should you change your mind. All of the equipment changes her appearances as well though, granting you a visual representation to your playstyle. That being said, I think people are going to ask for a glamour system. If there was one, I didn't see it, because we all know that fashion is more important than function, especially in an RPG. The game also has a built-in photo mode, so you know people are going to want that kind of thing, especially for how stylish Frey tends to be. Then you have Frey's skill trees, or spell trees, whichever you prefer. As she unlocks new magic from the various sorceresses in the game, each will come with their own spell tree. These unlock new methods of parkour, skills, and upgrades. At your enchantment book in your homes, you can even choose to undertake challenges for each and every skill. These grant permanent boosts for Frey, so frequently taking on challenges will let you empower her further, although some upgrades are more noticeable than others. Some are as simple as using a parkour skill in a very specific way, or some of them require you to maybe jump over an enemy and do an aerial attack, as opposed to just going at them with the spell normally. Some are really easy and it's just charge up the skill and hit them with it, so you might want to pick your battles with the easy ones first and leave the hard ones for later, or get the hard ones out of the way and then reap the benefits of the easier ones as you progress further. Now, one thing I briefly noticed when going through all of these menus was that for some reason it's got kind of like a fisheye lens effect. I noticed it moved on, it didn't really bother me, but I have a feeling that people are going to really take it or leave it when it comes to that menu style. All in all, though, these options are fairly simple and serve more as a foundation for the otherwise very involved combat system. You can also gain more stats and skills from Frey from certain objectives around the map should you desire more, so Frey will get noticeably stronger as you progress throughout the game. And with these equipment pieces, you can choose to focus on specific magics that you're more interested in, though you of course have to weigh in the fact that some enemies are going to be weak to different magics, so you might also need to switch up your style on occasion. Alright, and finally, the combat itself. Now, Frey is an agile and adept spellcaster, and each of her spell sets comes with different elements and themes for her to utilize. In this demo, she has 2 of them, Frey's magic, her own native magic, and Scylla's magic. Now, Frey's magic is mostly earth and nature based. She hurls rocks at enemies and swings vines at them. She can damage them and snare them. She has a lot of ranged attacks and support spells to help with the more agile or airborne creatures, while she also has a ton of crowd control and sustaining skills to help push back the enemies on the ground. The game calls this magic purple magic for the sake of your equipment and your stats. Scylla's magic is mostly fire-based, and is generally more about cornering and punishing enemies. A lot of the spells have shorter ranges or slower projectile speeds if they are ranged, but often have more explosive results, leaving puddles and walls of fire everywhere to trap AI in bad situations or force the AI to make bad decisions that make them take more damage. The game calls this magic red magic. Fitting, I know. We also know from all the trailers that there are other elements, and it's important to note that Frey can freely switch between all of her magics in combat, giving her access to dozens of spells, even in the demo, with only 2 of her actual elements, so it's probably going to get a little bit crazy once she has all of them. Now, to use the magic itself, Frey can equip 3 spells at once, and they all come in different categories. First, you have attack-based magics, which are your kind of like spammable spells. You know, you can charge these to increase their damage or change their effects. You can even use them during certain parkour skills to alter what they do entirely. You'll swap these based on preference mostly, but sometimes strategy. Like, for example, with the red magic, most of the attacks are really close up, but I can throw these exploding spears with my attack magic options at the flying enemies to make them blow themselves up and maybe the enemies around them if I get lucky. The support magic is really what makes up the majority of your spells though. These often come with the more interesting effects, binding enemies in place, creating walls of fire, or just leeching the very life from everything in sight. These all have cooldowns though, so you'll often spend time swapping between them, though using Frey's attack magic can get you your support magic skills back quickly. Then there's her special magic. I call it ultimate magic because I forgot what the game calls it. It's kind of like the spell set's finisher or a limit break, a super powerful spell that deals a ton of damage or has greater effects than even your support skills do, especially true in the case of Frey's, which summons these giant vines that just creep up on everything. Now to swap between these magics, Frey can pull up her spell wheels in the middle of a fight and use a radial menu to swap between the different spells. I gotta admit, I don't like radial menus most of the time. Monster Hunter is a game I classically just find it way too finicky, and I don't know why. However, I found this radial menu incredibly responsive and engaging with its mostly default settings. Must have given how frequently you'll use it. While the wheel by default slows down time around Frey, meaning you could still technically take a hit, or if you're in the middle of making a bad decision, you probably won't come out of it making a better one. You can actually set it to full pause mode, or even full real time to customize your gameplay experience. Overall, I found the gameplay really engaging and satisfying, minus a few janky animations which were clearly leftovers from Final Fantasy XV. You'll especially notice this with Scylla's sword swings, which definitely felt like I was just playing Noctis for a few seconds. Honestly, the same goes for her movement, which really works well in combat and exploration, and especially when opening items. That was a big improvement over Final Fantasy XV. If you parkour up to a chest and tap the open button, it'll actually do like a special parkour open instead of you needing to perfectly line it up and then accidentally jump a million times. That was honestly a really good improvement that I found Luminous made. But making those really small adjustments, there's like this extra momentum where you can't just turn the character. It's really tough to just turn the character in place. So it almost kind of feels like tank controls when you're moving really slowly, which happens inside of buildings. And it just gave me flashbacks to Final Fantasy XV's Pitios dungeon, trying to line up those exact jumps. And thankfully you're just doing a bunch of running around, and that feels really good 99% of the time. A couple of things that I think could definitely improve regarding the combat. Big thing is locking on. I felt like it was just losing the lock on constantly. And also actually just keeping track of enemies as a whole was kind of tough. They make seeing what direction an incoming attack is coming from really easy. Like it's a giant flashing red arrow under Frey. So there's no way you're going to miss that. But there's plenty of times where I'll just do like a 360 with the camera and just not be able to see the enemy. I am also colorblind, which we'll talk about in a minute as well, but it was a bit of a struggle. Now, as for any other comments I have on the demo, the game is high on visual and gameplay accessibility options, but low on sound-based ones, which was kind of surprising to me. A few things. First, the difficulty. The demo starts on easy, but with your accessibility options, you can change it freely to normal or hard outside of combat. But it also has a ton of other little tweaks if you need to make it easier or want to even make it harder sometimes, depending on what your preferences are. For example, you can actually modify how much damage Frey takes. You can increase it or decrease it manually. So if you want to play on easy mode, but you don't really like feeling like an unkillable god, you might want to crank the damage taken all the way up. Or you can play on hard and turn the damage down if you find that maybe being killed in 1 or 2 hits over and over again just isn't fun, but you want the enemies to be that good bit tankier. You can also customize the wheel's time slow, like I mentioned earlier. You can even determine how long enemies are knocked down, how quick stamina comes back for Frey. Set the game to automatically switch your support spells if one's on cooldown, automatically evade as long as you're not in the middle of an action, or automatically chug healing items in case you fall below a certain threshold. So yeah, tons of accessibility when it comes to difficulty itself, and I'm really glad to see that. Then, of course, you have controls and display. Controls is mostly the standard stuff, and then display has a bunch of different options as well. The big thing is that it has 3 display modes for the PS5 instead of the regular 2. Normally it's like performance or 4K, or something like that. But this one actually has quality focused, which is the standard. It's got a good mix of frame rate. The game looks good. But then you also have your performance mode, which will lower the graphics and increase the frame rate, or ray tracing mode, which will improve the graphics, but potentially affect performance. So I played it on quality focus. I thought that was perfectly fine. I didn't want to make any adjustment at any point, but you do have those options if they're interesting to you. Accessibility also has a ton of gameplay and disability-related options, but most of the time it's just about making the game a little bit less tedious to play in some ways. This is where you can like modify Cuff's actual like talking amount. You can even make it so automatic item gathering is turned on. That's a big one. I highly recommend turning that on. But if you aren't good at like the lock picking or the puzzles or any certain elements of the game, there's usually an option in here to either automatically do it or make it easier. So I think there's going to be a lot of people that look to those things when they're not as interested in those gameplay elements. Now, a big thing that was actually in the display options, but is really a direct accessibility option, is colorblind mode. Now, as you can see, I played as Franos for a fair portion of it. And while it helps, I found this issue with colorblind modes in recent years is that they're there and they can help, but I don't know if developers, and that includes in this case, really understand what colorblind mode is supposed to be doing. It is supposed to be making gameplay elements more distinct. And I'm not sure what gameplay elements this is actually making distinct. It changes the color, it changes the visuals, but unfortunately the core design of certain things just makes it so the foliage and the enemies, again, tracking the enemies is just quite tough. If I can't find the enemies because they're hard to track in the tall grass and in just the mesh of wildlife colors because they're similar colors to it, then turning on a colorblind mode when they just makes them all the same color, it's just this funky acid trip, doesn't do anything. It's good for games that have like different qualities of items like legendary, epic, because I have a hard time sometimes telling between some of the really weird ones that like Diablo 3, for example, has, and hopefully Diablo 4 doesn't have either. But in terms of actually playing the game, this isn't an accessibility option I need. Something that outlines enemies or with a modifiable outline would probably be preferred to a colorblind mode, at least for this game and honestly quite a few others in recent years, like I said. Anyway, I actually really enjoyed it. While it definitely has some downsides, there are downsides that I feel like are representative of Luminous engines and maybe just a couple of oversights. They aren't reasons why I wouldn't play a game, but I know this game's going to be highly scrutinized. I mean, Luminous engine is a bit of a one that people are kind of torn about because of how it performed with Final Fantasy 15, and this being the studio that made Final Fantasy 15, even if a lot of the people working at it have changed, including the guy who actually founded it, who hasn't been there since like a year after Final Fantasy 15 came out. A lot of people just aren't sure. You know, the trailers are also kind of a little bit more, how do I say, pop culture, I suppose. You know, some people aren't big fans of the dialogue. I found the dialogue here perfectly fine, the banter between her and Cuff, but I know that there's just a lot of judgment around the game and whether or not I'll be good. Based on what I've played, I have confidence at least in the technical aspects, even though a few of them could use some work, but it's really that story that I want to see. I'm compelled to actually learn more about Frey from the trailers, but I didn't get to experience that here, so without a first-hand account, I can't say I'm any more confident than I was before. For me, though, there's a bit of a different issue. The release date, January 24th, I probably won't play this on release. In fact, I know I won't play this on release, because January 24th is the same day that we are projecting that the new Final Fantasy XIV Ultimate will come out. And as such, it would be at least a week till I can play this, and then Octopath 2 is in February, so we'll see if I even have time for this. So, yeah, I'm at a bit of a crossroad with this one, but I hope anyone looking to pick it up enjoys it, enjoys the demo, and I would definitely give it a peek. I'd keep your eye on it at the very least, especially as they do more marketing or pushing or whatever they plan on doing for the game before it actually releases. Anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for, well, more, I guess. If I have anything else to make on Forspoken, I will. Anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.